Good evening, everybody. Dr. Huda Zoghbi is a Lebanese-born American geneticist and a professor at the Departments of Molecular and Human Genetics, Neuroscience, and Neurology at Baylor College of Medicine. She is the director of the Jan and Dan Duncan Neurological Research Institute and serves as research-in-chief at Texas Children's Hospital. As a pediatrician, seeing children with incurable inherited neurological diseases and not being able to provide them with hope piqued her interest in research. Her work explains genetic mechanisms responsible for a number of devastating neurological disorders, including Rett syndrome. Zoghbi's discoveries have provided new ways of thinking about other neurological disorders, such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's diseases, autism, and intellectual disability, which could lead to new therapeutics and better, more efficient treatments. Anthony DeLuca, as Dr. Matthew said, whose daughter was Dr. Zoghbi's patient, was supposed to introduce her tonight, but illness kept him away. He says, "My family and I see Huda as a ray of light, a voice of hope, and a tireless force, driving research to identify the root causes of various neurological disorders, and then to develop new therapeutics and treatments. I just love her." Please welcome Dr. Huda Zoghbi.
Shall I stand here? Yeah. Good evening, and thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Virginia, for sponsoring this lovely event. It's really humbling to be here, the company of so many wonderful women and men who have inspired many of us. So in the next few minutes, I thought maybe I'll share with you my journey in science and why I love getting up every morning to go to work. What's the secret in my life that make me feel so happy getting up and getting to work every morning? So you've heard, I started my career as a pediatrician. I came to Baylor College of Medicine to train in pediatrics, and I loved pediatrics, but I became fascinated by the brain and decided to become a neurologist, a pediatric neurologist. And it was in my first year as an intern in neurology that I started seeing children with devastating neurologic diseases. And I couldn't bear the pain of telling a parent, your child has a terrible neurologic disease. Unfortunately, we don't know what causes it, but there's a chance, 1 in 2 or 1 in 4, this might happen again to you. And that was the biggest pain, especially when you get pregnant with your first child, telling families that. So I would go home every night and literally would cry about it. It was so hard seeing all these neurological diseases and not knowing their causes. And I thought long and hard about it. My husband said, you better do something about it. You're not going to come home and cry about this every night. So think what you want to do. And I decided I'll finish my training. I'll become a clinical pediatric neurologist. But as soon as I'm done, I have to go find a way to learn in a lab what to do so that maybe I'll find the causes for these diseases. And that's what happened. The day I finished my clinical training, luckily I found a wonderful mentor, Dr. Arthur Baudet, who accepted me in his lab to learn how to do genetic research and cloning. DNA cloning and disease gene mapping was just coming on board. This was 1985, so he was willing to take me into his lab. I knew nothing about science, nothing. But he was willing, and I was going to give it a try. I knew it will be hard because it's really a different language from being a clinician, and I was at the top of my game. I was a good doctor. My patients loved me. I was experienced, ready to really be a faculty member, and now have to be demoted to really lower than the graduate students, because unlike the graduate students, my college education was 10 years before, medical school, pediatrics, neurology. That took 10 years, whereas they just came out of college. They know the latest in science. So I knew really much less than anyone in that lab. But I'm so glad I did that. I believed somehow, and I would mention something here, naivety is the greatest gift. I think youth and naivety go together. When you're young, you want to make a difference, and you're naive, so you do it. And one particular disease, Rett syndrome, is what I wanted to work on. I was very intrigued by the disorder because the girls started healthy, and they did everything a normal 1 to 2 year old will do, and then they lost all that. And they had every part of their brain affected, basically. They had motor problems, seizures, autism, intellectual disability. It was devastating. So imagine that. And it was one in a family, so you couldn't even map that gene because it's just sporadic. But that's why I went into the lab to clone the Rett syndrome gene. And of course, Art told me that's not possible. And he was a great mentor. He advised me to pick another problem that you could map. So I picked an adult neurodegenerative disease, and I worked on that while in his lab. And here I have to mention that really I owe my success in science to Art. He was an incredible mentor. I think whenever I walked into his office, he never saw a woman or a man walked into his office. He saw me and was interested in what I'm doing and how could he help me. And I always bring him up because I think it's really important that men can be the most amazing mentors to women, and I was fortunate to benefit from that experience. So in 3 years, Art thought I was ready to leave the nest and start my own lab. I was nervous, but he really pushed me. He said, "You move across the hall, I'll be here, you can do it." That's another thing that really helped me, to have a man believe in me and tell me I can do it when I honestly did not believe in myself. If you would ask me, I always doubted myself. Even when I made the discoveries, found a gene that I worked on Art's lab and my own lab, and then 16 years later, found the Rett syndrome gene. It took forever because it was impossible, but it opened up the field of autism. It taught us that so many diseases can be sporadic. Fast forward to today, all these diseases I saw that broke my heart, we found the causes for the majority of them. Fast forward to today, some of the diseases that's so dear to my heart, we're now working with pharmaceutical companies to do clinical trials in 2024 and 2025. So for me, I believe in science. Science is really what changed the world for the people I love, for the patients that I saw, hundreds of them with Rett syndrome, for the patients that I saw with neurodegenerative diseases. And I would mention those were very rare diseases I worked on. Rett was 1 in 10,000. The balance disorders was 1 in 100,000. But it turns out what Rett taught us about science became informed the broader field of autism. The whole field of autism and how we approach finding the causes of autism genetically was lessons learned from what we did with Rett syndrome. Similarly, this rare neurodegenerative disease taught me so much, to the point I found the best pathway and opportunities to now tackle Alzheimer. And we're working to find a way to prevent Alzheimer. We identified potential therapeutic targets to help us find a way to prevent Alzheimer in people who had a family history of Alzheimer who might be at risk for that, or people who have a gene that makes them vulnerable to that. So it's been a wonderful journey. But I'll tell you the best part of it. You know, the first few years, you're passionate and you're working on what you want to do, and you do it. But quickly, that morphs into training people. Training scientists in my own lab has been the most rewarding experience. And I've always wondered, how could I pay Art back for being the awesome mentor he's been for me? For me, it was really through the trainees. I pay him back by training the best possible people. I try to multiply Art's effect, and the 105 who graduated and the few more to graduate in the coming years, I hope will multiply the effects we could do to help all these people with different diseases. So it's really the people in my lab and the questions we're trying to answer and the problem we're trying to solve is what makes me excited to get up and go to work every day. Now you asked about challenges. I'm sure everybody wants to know the challenges. Yes, there were some. Perhaps the most, for me at least, the most difficult one, believe it or not, I'm that old, that's why it is this way. There was no woman scientist, physician scientist, who had children and a family who could be my role model. I didn't know who to look at to advise me. That was the hardest for me. As much as Art was a wonderful member, I remember we were at Cold Spring Harbor meeting when actually the announcement of sequencing the genome was made, and I was so missing my 4-month-old baby and about to really just fall apart and cry. I ran to Art. I figured I'll get comfort from him. And I looked at Art. I said, "Do you miss your children when you go to meetings?" And he goes, "No, it's just a few days." It's just a few days and they're with their mother. I don't worry about it. That's when I knew I had to figure it out. And it was hard. I wouldn't deny that. I feel comfortable with you to tell you, I did live with guilt for 10 years. Watching other women womaning the mother's desk at school, decorating classroom, always being there in the face of their children, and me having to drop my kids and go to work and come back in the evening, be with them, was really, really hard. I was scared to death my kids will be a mess, or they will not be happy, or they'll feel different. But I did the best I could do. We had a rule that when I go home at 5:30 or 6, I'm with them 100% of the time. I will go to the lab at 9 p.m. after they go to bed. I was a postdoc, so you have to do that to get somewhere. But I did really worry for the longest time. But it turns out, if you love them and if you're there for what's important, I was there for the games, not the practices. I was there for every piano recital, not the practices. So if you really and have dinner with them and so on, they will actually turn out okay. And what happened when they were about 10 to 12, when most adolescents are pushing their parents away, mine were very happy to see their parents. They were not sick of us. So, and fast forward to today, our son became a physician and a psychiatrist, went to Columbia University and chose to come back to Baylor College of Medicine. And he's trying to solve the genetics of psychiatric disorders. And our daughter went to Middlebury College and then did public health, and she's now vice president at Texas Children's Hospital. So they both did not shy away from working. They both, of course, are married to working, spouses. So I think that was, I would say, the hardest thing. The other hard thing is juggling. I think, as I mentioned to you, I didn't have role models. That means as I became a physician scientist and made the first little discovery, you're grabbed to serve here and to serve there. And I think that quickly became very demanding, and juggling all this and learning when to say no and how to guard life and the lab and the family was a little bit of a challenge for me. But along the way, I've met wonderful people, I've met wonderful scientists. I found that one of the most beautiful things we do in science is being generous. We're generous sharing information, and we're generous training people, sharing, giving them things to take with them to succeed. And that's a gift. All of you know when you give someone a gift, is far more rewarding than when you get a gift. And I find that really what sustained me through this career in science. Have I had doubt about myself? You're going to be surprised if I tell you I doubted I was any good, I'm worth anything, I deserve any recognition, till I was about 50 years of age. And I should mention, I had got into the National Academies well before I was 50. But I had that doubt. For one reason or another, I really always doubted myself. And I'm thankful that I doubted myself, because for the last 10 to 15 years, it helped me so much, helped so many women become really successful scientists. My lab, I've always made a point of having 50-50. I find the women precious and the men precious, and when they're together, they can make magic in science because the exchange of ideas on all the creativity. And often you get these stellar women, and they go on a job hunt, and they're like the best you've ever trained, and they come back after 3 or 4 visits. They didn't get that job. And then I have this man who's just wonderful, but maybe not as great as this woman. And he'll go on 3 job interviews, and he'll get all of them. And this is when I immediately reflected on myself and self-doubt. And I started really digging deep with my women trainees to figure out, what is it that they're not? So I would sit with them, pretend I'm the person interviewing on the other side. And I would watch their body language, how they're sitting, how they're presenting themselves, and so on and so forth. And I would immediately, revolt and encourage them to sit straight, encourage them to speak with confidence, and remind them how great they are. It's really that simple. That's really what we need to do to young women in science. It's innate. I think it's innate. I don't know. Some women in the room may disagree with me, but I felt it was in me, and I've seen it in almost every woman I trained. It's innate. We don't feel that confidence. We do have that self-doubt, and we need somebody to remind us. Art did tell me that. I didn't believe him. I mean, I walked out of his class. I honestly didn't believe it. I thought I'm going to falter. I'm going to fall on my face. And everything that happened, every success, I somehow attributed to some other chance occasion. Until one day, one of the Hughes presidents sat down with me, and he told me how much he believed in me and how much he was amazed and this and that. It took that for me, I was 50 by then, to believe I could really do it. That's why I do it now much, much earlier in the life of my trainees. And I find it very helpful. It does happen to men as well, but I've seen it more in women. It definitely happens to group who come from underrepresented group in science, who also have had less fortunate situation. I've seen that happen as well. So to me, these were the 2 big challenges: trying to figure life, being a scientist, a physician, and a mother and a wife, and juggling all that. Thankfully, I figured it with a lot of help, I should mention. I tell all my young trainees right now, if you want to be a scientist, focus on that. You cannot do everything. You have to hire people to help you do some of the things that you do not have to do yourself. And the second one is really the self-doubt. And I think the more we're cognizant of that, the more we can help a lot of women, because they are just as capable, but they are doubtful. I don't know how much more time I have. I probably passed my time, so I should be quiet and allow the next speaker to come forward. Thank you.